I found out I wasn't invited to my own brother's wedding on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting on the floor of my Austin apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and half-assembled IKEA furniture. My laptop was open on the coffee table, a spreadsheet glowing in front of me. I worked remotely as a data analyst for a logistics software startup, which sounded cooler than it felt most days. In reality, my life at that moment consisted of color-coded cells, Slack pings, and the faint smell of takeout Thai I'd eaten straight from the container the night before. My phone buzzed on the couch behind me. At first I ignored it. Slack. Whatever. Then it buzzed again. And again. A rapid-fire chain of notifications. I twisted around, half crawling over a pile of bubble wrap to grab it. The screen lit up with a flood of banners from the family group chat. Alice Chaos. A new photo filled the top of the screen. My older brother, Nolan, grinning with his fiancée, Sloane, on the steps of a white farmhouse wrapped in fairy lights. Behind them, a vineyard rolled out in perfect curated rows, like something pulled from a wedding magazine. Underneath, my mom had written, Nolan and Sloane's dream venue. We are booked for October 5th in Sonoma. Beneath that, messages stacked up like dominoes. Dad, this place is gorgeous. Aunt Marcy, it's perfect. So happy for you too. Cousin Lex. Okay, but the photos are going to be insane? Mom, flights are already filling up, folks. Let's coordinate travel in this chat so no one gets left behind. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, my brain lagging behind. October 5th, Sonoma. My brother's wedding. My only sibling. This was the first I was hearing about it. Another ding. Mom, I just booked ours. Portland SFO then rental car. Who else is coming in Thursday? More bubbles popped up, little digital voices chiming in. Aunt Marcy, we'll be there Thursday too. Lex, I'll DM you my flight deets, Aunt Claire. Dad, should we stay near the venue or in town? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed. Wait, when did you book the date? Then I deleted it. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something too large and it was stuck halfway down. I scrolled up, searching for the part of the conversation I'd somehow missed. The earlier discussion about dates and venues and planning. There was nothing. The last message before the wedding dump was from my dad, 3 weeks ago, a blurry photo of his grill and the caption, first cookout of the season. Marin, you should have been here, burgers came out perfect for once. That was it. My phone started ringing, cutting off the stream of text. My mom's name flashed across the screen. Mom Alice. I hesitated a second, then swiped to answer. Hey Mom. Marin. Her voice was bright, pitched higher than normal, threaded with the same practiced excitement she used whenever something big and family important was happening. Did you see the photos? Isn't it gorgeous? I looked at the frozen image of my brother and his fiancée on my laptop screen. The venue really was beautiful. White farmhouse, golden hour light, vineyards stretching into the distance. Yeah, I said. I saw. I knew they'd love it. As soon as the planner sent the photos, I told them, this is the one, you have to grab it before someone else does. And they had an opening in October that worked with Sloane's fellowship schedule, so it all just fell into place. Isn't that wonderful? It's in October? I asked. This October? The 5th. A Saturday. Peak season apparently, but somehow they squeezed us in. She laughed like it was an inside joke between her and fate. You know your brother, he always lands on his feet. I pressed my palm into the carpet until the rough fibers bit into my skin. When were you going to tell me? There was the smallest pause on the line. A stutter in the rhythm. Oh honey, we were just about to call you, she said quickly. The group chat got ahead of us, I guess. I wanted to tell you properly, not just drop it in a text. You know how family gets when there's a wedding, everyone goes crazy. I glanced back at the chat, at the messages pouring in. Heart emojis. Champagne emojis. People already talking about flights and dresses and hotels. Right, I said. It's going to be so beautiful, Mom continued. Sonoma in the fall, the colors, the vineyards. And the food, Marin, wait until you see the menu. You'll love it. Hey, I said. So, what do I need to do? Should I start looking at flights? The silence that followed wasn't long, not really. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But it stretched out, taut and thin, like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Well, my mom said finally, her voice shifting. Softer, cautious. That's actually what I needed to talk to you about. My stomach dropped. About what? About logistics, she said. The guest list and the venue and all that. I frowned. What about the guest list? The place they chose, it's intimate, she said carefully. Very boutique. They only allow a certain number of guests. It's part of their whole aesthetic, small and curated, and it doesn't matter. The point is there's a cap, and with Sloane's family and our side and the wedding party and all the plus ones, it's just tight. I didn't say anything. I could hear a TV murmuring somewhere in the background on her end, the clink of a dish being set in the sink, all the mundane sounds of my parents' house in Portland. Okay, I said slowly. And, she exhaled, we had to make some hard choices. I let those words sit there. Hard choices, I repeated. Yes. You know how it is. Numbers, budgets, all of that. Sloane has a huge family, and with all your aunts and cousins, it adds up. I knew my cousins. There were 6 of them. 6. This wasn't some sprawling dynasty with 50-second cousins twice removed. And Nolan felt strongly about making sure all of Sloane's siblings and cousins could be there, Mom continued. It was really important to her to have her whole family present. You understand, right? I swallowed. Are you telling me I'm not invited? Her inhale was sharp, a soft gasp of protest. Oh honey, don't say it like that. It's not that you're not invited exactly, it's just. Exactly what is it, then? I asked too calmly. It's just, with the space constraints and the budget, and you live so far away now. That last part came out in a rush, like she'd found a piece of justification she could hold on to. You're in Texas and it's such a long trip for a weekend and you're always so busy with work. We thought, she faltered. We assumed it would be easier on you. I stared at the blank wall opposite me, where I'd been planning to hang a framed map of the world. It was still leaning against the corner, glass reflecting the late afternoon light. You assumed I wouldn't want to come to my only brother's wedding, I said. That's not what I said. Her voice went tight. Defensive. Don't twist my words, Marin. You know what I mean. I almost laughed. I didn't, but the sound sat bitter and metallic at the back of my throat. Does Nolan know about this? I asked. That I'm easier to cut? Of course he does, she said quickly. We discussed everything as a family. He agonized over it. He didn't want to hurt your feelings. Seems like that part was inevitable, I said. Marin. My name came out in that warning tone I'd heard my entire life, the one that meant I was being unreasonable, dramatic, difficult. You've been so independent for years now. You have your own life. You didn't come home for Christmas last year or Easter. You skipped your grandmother's memorial. I was in the middle of a product launch, I snapped. I couldn't just. And we understood, she cut in. We always understood. You've made your choices. Nolan just made his. This day is about him and Sloane. We all need to be supportive. Supportive. I thought about the last time I'd seen my brother in person. 2 years ago in my parents' backyard, him flipping burgers on the grill while I helped Mom in the kitchen. He told me between bites of potato salad that he didn't know what he'd do without me when we were kids. How I'd always been the one to fix things, to smooth over fights, to distract Dad when Nolan had gotten into trouble. You're the glue, Rinny, he'd said, using the nickname he'd given me when he was 5 and couldn't pronounce my full name. You've always been the glue. Apparently, glue was easy to toss once everything was stuck together. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. My parents are flying across the country to drink wine in Sonoma and watch my brother get married. Our aunts and cousins are all going. Some wedding planner is getting paid more than my annual rent. And I'm, what? Watching the live stream. There won't be a live stream, Mom said, missing the point entirely. It's that kind of place. Very unplugged, very in the moment. But we'll take tons of photos and videos and send them to you, of course. And there's going to be a bigger reception in Portland in the winter, more casual maybe then. Mom, I said. She stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of my fridge and the faint whoosh of traffic from South Lamar drifting through the half-open window. You forgot me, I said quietly. That's not fair, she said immediately. We didn't forget you. We just prioritized. There's a difference. I let out a breath that shook more than I wanted it to. Right, I said. I guess I know where I fall on the priority list, then. Don't be melodramatic, she said. This isn't about you. This is about your brother's happiness. He hates conflict, you know that. He didn't want to upset you, but in the end he had to make decisions that were best for him and Sloane. That's what adults do. Adults. I was 29 years old. I paid my own bills. I'd moved halfway across the country by myself. I worked late nights and early mornings in the kind of hours that blurred into each other until I wasn't sure what day it was anymore. But in my mother's mind, apparently, I wasn't adult enough to have my presence at my brother's wedding considered non-negotiable. Something inside me shifted. Not broken. Breaking is loud and sudden. This was quieter. A slow, clean snap of something that had been strained for a very long time. Marin. Mom said when I didn't respond. Honey, are you there? Yeah, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I'm here. You understand, don't you? She pressed. These things happen. Weddings are complicated. Families are complicated. You've always been so reasonable. That's what I love about you. You don't make everything about you. I thought about all the times I hadn't made things about me. The college acceptance I'd celebrated over takeout because Nolan had just gotten engaged. The promotion I'd downplayed at Thanksgiving because Sloane had announced her residency match. The panic attack I'd had in the airport bathroom before flying back to Austin after Christmas, pressing a paper towel to my mouth so no one would hear me. Yeah, I said again. I've noticed. What was that? She asked. Nothing. There was a beat of silence. Then cheery again, as if we'd just sorted out a minor scheduling issue. Good. I knew you'd be mature about this. We'll make it up to you, I promise. Maybe you can come stay with us for a week later this year. Just the three of us, like old times. Old times. The ones where Nolan's soccer games had mattered more than my piano recitals. Where I'd spent entire summers helping my dad sand and stain the deck while my brother napped on the couch. Where every conversation at dinner had circled back to Nolan's grades, Nolan's future, Nolan's everything. Sure, I said. We'll see. We love you, honey, she said. Don't ever think we don't love you. I have to call Aunt Marcy back about her hotel, but we'll talk later, okay? Okay. And Marin. Yeah. Don't tell Nolan you're upset, all right? He's so stressed with work and planning, the last thing he needs is guilt on top of everything. Of course. Protect Nolan. That was the unspoken Ellis family motto. I won't, I said. Good girl, she said automatically, the way she used to when I was 7 and rinsing dishes without being asked. Talk soon. The line went dead. I sat there on the floor, phone still pressed to my ear long after the call had ended. The spreadsheet on my laptop dimmed, then went black. Somewhere down the hall, my neighbor's dog started barking. A car alarm chirped in the parking lot and then stopped. I pulled the phone away and looked at the family group chat again. The latest message was from Sloane. Can't believe we got the date. So excited to celebrate with all of you. All of you. I dropped the phone onto the couch like it burned. My eyes stung, but I refused to blink hard enough to let tears fall. I didn't want to cry over this. I didn't want to give them that much power over me. Instead, I did what I always did when something hurt. I went back to work. I opened my laptop and pulled the spreadsheet back up. Numbers, columns, forecasts. I stared at them until they blurred, then forced them back into focus. A shipment analysis for a client in Ohio. A bottleneck in the supply chain. A glitch in the routing algorithm. The part of my brain that handled data clicked in automatically, cool and precise. But another part, the one that kept replaying my mother's voice saying this isn't about you, sat back and watched. You weren't invited, it whispered. Not by accident. Not by oversight. By design. And for the first time in my life, instead of shoving that voice down and telling it to stop being dramatic, I listened. I didn't know it yet, sitting there on that carpet in Austin with my knees digging into the floor and my heart lodged somewhere near my collarbone. But that was the moment everything started to change. Before that phone call, before the vineyard photos and my mother's chirping voice and the sudden crushing realization that I'd been quietly cut from one of the biggest days in my brother's life, I'd always thought of myself as someone who didn't need much from anyone. Not because I was particularly independent by nature, though I liked to pretend that was the case, but because needing things had never worked out especially well for me growing up. My name is Marin Ellis, 29 years old, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Not one of those trendy transplants who post filtered photos of Powell's books on Instagram and pretend they discovered the city. I was a real local, rain-weathered, coffee-addicted, and forever carrying a faint memory of damp pine needles in the back of my mind. My childhood wasn't tragic. I wasn't mistreated or abandoned or anything dramatic enough to put in a memoir. It was just lopsided. My brother Nolan was 3 years older. Tall, athletic, bright, charming. One of those all-American boys who seemed to draw attention the way porch lights draw moths. Coaches loved him. Teachers adored him. Parents whispered to each other that he would go places. And he did. College on the East Coast. Tech job. A girlfriend who looked like she stepped out of a J.Crew catalog. And eventually, a fiancé with the kind of medical career my mother bragged about to the barista at her favorite coffee shop. Meanwhile I was fine. Good student. Quiet. The kid who sat in the front row and turned in homework early. Not enough of a prodigy to be impressive, but not messy enough to be a problem. I existed in the smooth middle terrain between extraordinary and difficult. Safe territory. Forgettable territory. My parents never said it out loud, of course. But you don't have to be told something directly when you grow up learning to read the room like gospel. When Nolan talked, everyone listened. When I talked, everyone nodded politely, then went back to whatever Nolan was doing. It wasn't hostile. Just habitual. Take birthdays. Nolan's were events. Backyard tents, themed cakes, cousins running around the yard with armfuls of water balloons. Mine were sheet cake from the grocery store and quiet dinners where Dad would inevitably fall asleep on the couch halfway through a movie I had picked. Or school. When Nolan made varsity soccer, we all went out for pizza and my mom cried proud tears. When I got accepted into the University of Washington with a partial scholarship, my parents congratulated me, then immediately launched into logistics about how we could fly out for Nolan's tech conference in Boston that same month. I learned early that if I wanted something, even attention, it was easier not to ask. Asking created conflict. Asking made me look needy. Asking resulted in the same outcome anyway. Silence was simpler. By my mid-20s, silence was practically my mother tongue. After college, I moved to Austin because I'd visited once during South by Southwest and loved how alive the city felt. Portland had too many ghosts of expectations. Austin was light. Fast. Independent. It was a good place to disappear in plain sight. I found a job quickly. A data analyst role at a logistics software startup that prided itself on kombucha on tap and radical transparency. Sounded more glamorous than it was, but I was good at it. Numbers made sense. Algorithms were predictable. Patterns could be solved. People were harder. My coworkers were friendly in that casually extroverted office happy hour way, but I never got close to anyone. Not because I didn't want to, more because I wasn't sure how. I'd grown too used to being the side character in my own family. Being the center of anything felt suspicious. So I built a quiet life. Work. Groceries. The occasional hike in the green belt. Phone calls home that got shorter over the years because, inevitably, they became Nolan updates. Nolan got a promotion. Nolan and Sloan moved into a new townhouse. Nolan was thinking about proposing. Nolan's dog had a stomach issue, but he was okay now, thank God. I didn't mind it. Not really. At least that's what I told myself. And when Nolan actually did propose, I was genuinely happy for him. I sent a thoughtful text, mailed a beautiful calligraphy card, even bought Sloan a delicate gold bracelet as an engagement gift. She responded with a smiley face and a, "Thanks, girl." My mother posted 26 photos on Facebook. Everything felt normal, familiar, predictable. And then little by little the communication slowed. My parents missed a call here and there. Nolan would text me back days later instead of instantly. Group chats happened without me noticing. Plans were made, trips scheduled, updates exchanged. It was subtle, gradual, easy to explain away. They're busy. I'm busy. Everyone's growing up. Nothing to overthink. But standing in my apartment after that call, with the taste of something metallic and sour at the back of my throat, I realized something that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Maybe they weren't drifting. Maybe they were detaching. From me. The glue finally unstuck. I wasn't sure when it had begun. Maybe when I moved away. Maybe when I stopped coming home for holidays because flights were expensive and my mom always seemed vaguely disappointed by my presence anyway. Maybe when Nolan's life got full enough that he no longer needed a quiet, steady little sister orbiting around his. Or maybe, just maybe, it had been happening all along and I was only now refusing to pretend otherwise. Because as painful as it was to admit, something about being excluded from that wedding didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like the final, natural evolution of the role I'd been playing since childhood. reliable, accommodating, self-sufficient, easy to love in theory, easy to overlook in practice. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that being overlooked would end up being the greatest gift my family ever gave me. It would break me open. It would push me out of the life I'd been quietly enduring. It would send me places I never would have gone. And it would turn me into someone I never expected to become. I just hadn't gotten there yet. At that moment I was still sitting cross-legged on a carpeted floor, holding a phone that felt suddenly heavier than it should have, staring at a message that read, "So excited to celebrate with all of you, except me. But the thing about breaking points is this. You don't recognize them when they're happening. Only when you see the pieces afterward." Mine had just started to crack. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, though the pressure behind my eyes stayed there like a bruise that refused to bloom, but because my mind would not stop replaying the call. Every sentence, every hesitation, every place my mother had smoothed the truth with that soft, sugar-coated tone she used whenever something cruel was being wrapped in reason. "This isn't about you. You've been so independent. You always understand. We prioritized. Good girl. Good girl." I'd been a good girl my entire life. Polite, responsible, low maintenance. The kind of daughter you didn't have to worry about because she never asked for anything she might not get. And where had it gotten me? Cut from my brother's wedding like a line item trimmed for budget. Around 3 a.m. I gave up on the idea of sleep and padded into the kitchen. Austin's summer heat still pressed through the walls even with the AC running, dense and sticky. I poured myself water, took one sip, set the glass down, and stared at my resemblant reflection in the dark kitchen window. I looked fine. Normal. Tired. You don't look like someone whose family just forgot to include her in the most important day of her brother's life. Maybe that was part of the problem. I'd spent so many years training myself not to react that I'd become invisible even to myself. The silence of the apartment was heavy. It made me feel more alone than usual, like the quiet was a living thing that had finally realized it could swallow me whole. I grabbed my keys. I put on shoes. And without a plan, without even knowing why, I drove. Austin at night is a different creature. The daytime crowds on South Congress scattered, the music on 6th Street muted at a distance, the highway lights strobing over empty lanes. I merged onto I-35 with no destination, the city unspooling behind me. Some people drive to calm down. I drive to hear myself think. Somewhere around Round Rock the thoughts finally came. Not gentle. Not gradual. Explosive. They didn't think about you because they don't see you. Not really. Not as someone essential. Not as someone whose absence would hurt. And something inside me, some tender, fragile thing I'd spent years protecting, finally snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But clearly. A single, undeniable truth cutting through the fog. If I stayed in the life I was living, nothing would ever change. Because no one expected me to change. No one thought I could. I pulled off the highway and parked in an empty Walmart lot, the overhead lights buzzing like faint insects. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers turned white. And for the first time in years I let myself say the words out loud, even if just to the windshield. I can't do this anymore. Not Austin. Not this job that drained me but never challenged me. Not this role I kept playing in my family's story. A background character who existed to make everything easier. I didn't know what I wanted yet. But I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to be the version of myself who would quietly accept being excluded from her brother's wedding. Who would send a polite text saying, "Have a beautiful day," and pretend she wasn't gutted. Who would smile on FaceTime while everyone else toasted with champagne and said the word family, like it included me. Something had to change. Me. I had to change. By the time the sky started lightening into that pale early morning lavender, I'd driven back to my apartment. The air smelled like asphalt and dawn. I walked inside, locked the door behind me and stood in the middle of the living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. And just like that, silently and surely, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I was going to disappear. Not in a dramatic, leave a cryptic note on the counter kind of way. But in the only way that had ever been mine for the taking. I was going to choose myself. I was going to stop waiting for someone else to make room for me. I was going to step out of the frame entirely and build a life where I didn't have to fight to be visible. The specifics would come later. But the decision? The decision was already alive inside me, pulsing like a heartbeat. The universe had drawn a line. My family had drawn a line. And finally, I was drawing mine too. I didn't know it then, but that quiet, exhausted early morning resolve would become the first domino in a chain that stretched across continents, careers, and relationships. It was the moment where the old version of me, the good girl, the reliable one, the afterthought, began to unravel. And the woman I would become began to form. But the first step wasn't reinvention. It was escape. For the rest of that morning, I moved through my apartment like someone watching herself from a few feet outside her own body. Aware, functional, but strangely detached, as if the events of the previous night had knocked something loose between my mind and my instincts. At 8:17 a.m., my Slack reminder started popping up, cheerful and insistent. Stand up in 13 minutes. Don't forget to update the shipment delay dashboard. Client presentation slides due EOD. I stared at those notifications the same way you might regard a stranger touching your arm. Vaguely confused, faintly irritated, and suddenly overwhelmingly done. I didn't join Stand Up. Instead, I opened a blank document and typed 4 words. I need a break. Then I deleted them. Too vague. I typed again. I am requesting a leave of absence. My hands trembled a little, but I kept going. 2 paragraphs, factual and calm, with just enough burnout to sound professional and not enough detail to raise suspicion. When I finished, I sent it directly to Annalise, my manager. A woman in her 40s who wore chunky jewelry and once told me without irony that she manifested KPIs. I didn't wait for a response. I couldn't. If I hesitated, I'd lose my nerve. Next, I grabbed my laptop and walked to the small patio outside my apartment. The air was thick with early heat, the kind that coated your skin like a film. I set the laptop on the table, opened a private browsing window, and typed. One-way flights from Austin. No specific destination. No plan. Just the shape of escape. Options unfolded across my screen like a challenge. New York. Seattle. Toronto. Seoul. Lisbon. Tokyo. I hesitated when I saw it. I'd always wanted to go there. I couldn't even remember when the desire started. Maybe when I was a kid watching my neighbor's Miyazaki DVDs. Maybe in college when a friend returned from a semester abroad with stories about quiet temples and neon city nights. It didn't matter. What mattered was the sudden, fierce, gut-level certainty that rose in me like a tide. Go now. A one-way ticket for 3 days from now was expensive, but not impossible. I checked my savings. Years of frugality. A job that paid well but never asked me to spend anything. No dependents. No debt. And then a quiet memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. My grandfather, the quiet one in the family. The only person who ever remembered my science fair projects, my piano recitals, the books I read. When he died, he left me a savings bond. Nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, just a small nest egg he said was, for when you want to stop playing small. It had matured 2 years ago. I'd never touched it. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I whispered, not to anyone in the apartment but to him wherever he was now. Then I bought the ticket. Austin, Los Angeles, Tokyo. 3 days. 3 days to dismantle the life I'd built. 3 days to walk away from everything that had defined me for almost 30 years. 3 days to figure out who I was when I stopped being convenient. The email confirmation chimed softly. There it was, in black and white. You're going. My phone buzzed. Annalise. Hi Marin. Just read your note. Wow, okay. Let's hop on a quick call when you're free to discuss next steps. I stared at her message. My chest was tight but steady. I typed back. I'll be unavailable the rest of the week. I'll submit everything HR needs by tomorrow. She sent 3 rapid responses, confused emojis, polite questions, and offer for support. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my messages and texted the Ellis Chaos group chat for the first time in months. Me. Hey everyone. I'm taking some personal time. Going offline for a while. I hope the wedding is beautiful. Talk soon. No explanation. No apology. No attempt to make my absence smaller than it was. For a moment nothing happened. Then, Nolan. Wait, what? What does that mean? Well, honey. Are you okay? Sloan. Is everything all right? Aunt Marcy. Marin, don't scare us like that, sweetie. Cousin Lex. The messages kept coming. I turned off my phone. Literally powered it down. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. The next 2 days passed in a blur of practical motion. Selling furniture. Giving notice on my apartment. Canceling utilities. Putting things in storage. My life broke down shockingly easily, like it had been waiting to be packed away all along. I told my coworkers I was taking extended leave. Some sent heart emojis. One asked if I was pregnant. Another wondered if I was joining a cult. I told no one the truth. I wasn't leaving for a destination. I was leaving for myself. The night before my flight, Austin was wrapped in one of those violent summer storms. Thunder rattling windows, sheets of rain slanting across the parking lot. I sat on the floor with my 2 suitcases open, deciding which pieces of my life were worth taking across the world. 3 months of clothes. A journal. One small framed photograph of me and my grandfather on a pier in Cannon Beach. That was it. The rest, everything else, could be replaced. Around midnight I finally stood. My apartment was empty, echoing with the thunder outside. I locked the door, dropped the keys into the mailbox for the leasing office, and walked through the rain to my car. Lightning flashed. The storm roared. And all I felt was clarity. The kind I hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow I would board a plane. Tomorrow I would vanish from my old life. And tomorrow I would begin the slow, terrifying, exhilarating process of becoming someone I hadn't met yet. The woman who didn't wait to be chosen. The woman who didn't need to be convenient. The woman who wasn't an afterthought. The woman who could walk out of her family's shadow and see the world beyond it. I didn't know her yet, but I was going to. I arrived at Austin Bergstrom Airport before the sun was up, the kind of hour where the world still feels half asleep, blurred at the edges. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in a rush of cold air conditioning that raised goosebumps on my arms. I checked in my 2 suitcases, each tagged with the bold, almost surreal letters. Austin to Tokyo. When the luggage disappeared down the conveyor belt, it felt like a little part of me went with it. Security was a blur. I took off my shoes. Put my laptop in a bin. Pretended not to see the toddler screaming at the cereal bar his mother had refused to buy. Everything felt both sharply real and completely unreal, as if I was watching my life from overhead. At the gate I found a seat facing the window. Planes moved across the tarmac like slow, patient animals. My flight 227 to Los Angeles, blinked steadily on the screen. For a moment, a thin film of panic threatened to rise. What was I doing? Flying to a country I'd never visited. Quitting a job I'd worked hard for. Leaving without telling anyone where I was going. But then I pictured that vineyard photo. The group chat messages. My mother's voice saying, "We prioritized." And the panic dissolved into something else. Resolve. I boarded when my group was called. Settled into a window seat. Watched Texas shrink beneath me until it became a patchwork quilt of fields and highways. I didn't think about the wedding. I didn't think about my parents. I didn't think about the version of me they preferred. Quiet, small, perpetually understanding. I thought about the person I might become. The flight to LA was short. The long haul to Tokyo was not. I ended up next to a retired teacher named Denise, who was visiting her daughter in Yokohama. She had kind eyes and the kind of warm, easy openness I'd never had. "You traveling for work?" she asked as we leveled off over the Pacific. "No," I said. "Personal." "A vacation?" she pressed. I hesitated. My old instinct was to make something up, something easy and non-intrusive. But that old instinct was exactly what I'd come here to shed. So instead I said, more like a reset. Her smile softened into something understanding, almost knowing. "Good," she said. "More people need those." We talked until the cabin lights dimmed. She told me about her years teaching 3rd grade, about her daughter who fell in love with Japan during a study abroad program, about the way starting over is less frightening when you're doing it for yourself. "You're braver than you think," she said at one point. I didn't believe her, not then, but I tucked the words away anyway. The rest of the flight passed in a dreamy, suspended sort of time. I slept. Woke. Watched the map screen inch our tiny plane over endless blue ocean. The cabin lights shifted from night to day as we chased the sun across the hemisphere. And then, finally, the announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at Narita International Airport shortly. Local time is 4:52 p.m. My pulse fluttered with something that was almost fear and almost excitement. I had made it to Japan. When I stepped out of the airport into the late afternoon humidity, the scent of jet fuel mixing with warm air and unfamiliar notes of food I couldn't name, a realization hit me with startling force. No one in my old life knew where I was. No one could call me to ask for a favor. No one could guilt me into understanding their needs. No one could forget to include me in their plans because I was no longer close enough to be something they remembered or forgot. I was anonymous. Invisible but by choice this time. And that distinction mattered more than I could articulate. My first week in Tokyo felt like stepping into a dream rendered in neon and quiet politeness. I stayed in a tiny capsule hotel in Shinjuku, the kind of place travelers booked when they wanted to be surrounded by motion but remain unseen. My bed was a small pod with a curtain, a shelf, a lamp, and just enough space to sit without hitting my head. It was perfect. Contained. Safe. I spent my days wandering. No itinerary, no pressure. I walked through the towering canyons of Shibuya, letting crowds flow around me like water. I visited Meiji Shrine at dawn, the trees tall and whispering above me. I stood at the edge of Tokyo Bay, watching ferries cut through waves that sparkled like silver thread. I ate udon in tiny shops where the steam fogged my glasses and no one tried to make conversation. Everywhere I went, I felt my shoulders unclench inch by inch. No one here knew I was the girl who'd been excluded from a wedding. No one here expected me to smile or accommodate or shrink. I was just a traveler. A stranger. A person allowed to exist without explanation. And for the first time in my life, being unimportant felt like freedom, not failure. One night, I sat on the rooftop terrace of the capsule hotel, legs folded beneath me, city lights blinking like constellations. I'd been in Japan for 6 days. Long enough to exhale the last remaining shards of the life I'd left behind. I opened my journal, one of the few belongings I'd chosen to bring, and wrote a single line. What do I want? Not what I was supposed to want. Not what would make anyone else proud. Not what would keep the peace. What did I want? I didn't have an answer. But for the first time that didn't scare me. It thrilled me. Because here, thousands of miles from the vineyard and the group chat and the version of myself I'd abandoned, the question wasn't frightening. It was a beginning. A blank page. A possibility. A door finally opening. And I had just stepped through it. Tokyo wrapped around me like a city-sized exhale. Alive and electric yet oddly gentle. Every day I walked until my feet ached, letting the sounds and colors wash over me like I'd been dipped into someone else's life. Someone braver, freer, unburdened. But eventually even the most beautiful dream becomes a backdrop. At some point you start craving connection. Not necessarily to people but to a purpose. And one evening while scrolling aimlessly through local events on my phone, I found something that made me pause. Intro to Japanese Handcrafts and Calligraphy, Beginner Workshop. Location: a small creative studio near Daikanyama. Price: cheap enough not to think twice. It started in an hour. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my shoes and ran. The studio was tucked between a quiet cafe and a boutique that sold minimalist home goods I couldn't afford. When I stepped inside, I was immediately greeted by soft instrumental music and the gentle scratch of brushes against paper. 6 people were already seated at low wooden tables. A woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun moved through the room, checking everyone's posture, correcting the angle of their brushes. Her name was Hayori Watanabe, and she would become one of the most important people I met on that trip. She stopped in front of me, her eyes warm and curious. "First time?" she asked. I nodded. "Is it that obvious?" Her smile deepened into something almost mischievous. "Everyone looks like this their first time. Like the paper is judging them." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the wedding news had detonated my life. He handed me a brush. "Don't think. Just move. Let the ink teach you." The class lasted 2 hours. I was terrible. My strokes wobbled, my pressure was uneven, and halfway through I accidentally splattered ink across my sleeve. But I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so deeply present. At the end of the session, Hayori touched my elbow gently. "You're too careful," she said. "You're afraid to take up space on the paper." I blinked. "You got all that from my handwriting? Your hand shows your mind." Her voice softened. "Most people who come here are tourists. They want a photo, a story. But you're carrying something heavy. You're here to lighten it." The words hit me with a strange, quiet force. I didn't tell her about the wedding or my family, or the years of shrinking myself so others could feel big. But somehow I felt like she already knew. "Come back," she said. "This place will be good for you." And so I did. I returned twice a week. Then 3. Then I started helping clean up after classes, refilling ink jars, folding aprons. Hiyori would brew tea and tell me stories of her travels in her 20s. How she'd spent a summer in Amsterdam learning dye techniques. How she'd gotten lost in Marrakesh and ended up drinking mint tea with an old calligrapher who taught her more in an hour than all her formal teachers combined. "You don't grow until you step outside of your life," she said once. "Staying is safe. Leaving is transformative." I didn't tell her how recently I had left mine. I didn't need to. She could see it in my hands. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. A few days later I met someone who would change the course of my career. Her name was Evelyn Cho. She was Korean-American, early 30s, sharp as a blade, and dressed in a way that made her look like she'd stepped out of a Seoul fashion editorial, wholly confident and effortlessly cool. I sat across from her in a tiny ramen shop in Ebisu, both of us waiting for our orders. When the chef placed a bowl in front of me, steam swirling toward my face, she leaned over and said, "First time here? You look like someone who doesn't know the difference between the spicy broth and the really spicy broth." I panic ordered, I admitted. She snorted. "Been there." We started talking because she complimented my earrings. We kept talking because something just clicked. She'd been living in Japan on and off for 8 years, running a small cross-border marketing consultancy that helped independent artisans sell their products overseas. She worked with ceramicists, textile artists, woodworkers, a patchwork network of craftspeople across Asia who had talent but not reach. The more she talked, the more animated she became, tapping the table for emphasis. "Small creators struggle because they're brilliant at their craft and terrible at logistics," she said. "And Western companies, they bulldoze in, demand unrealistic timelines and shred relationships. They don't actually understand people." Something inside me tugged. Logistics. I understood logistics. I understood supply chain dynamics, data flows, transportation bottlenecks. That had been my entire job in Austin. But I'd never imagined those skills could matter anywhere outside corporate drudgery. Evelyn studied me for a moment, tilt of her head sharp. "What's your background?" she asked. I told her, briefly. "Data analyst. Logistics. Software." She sat back, eyebrows raised. Wait. You can analyze freight patterns? Identify inefficiencies? Optimize inventory management?" "I mean, yes." Her grin was instant and wide. "Oh, you're coming with me." "Excuse me. You have no idea how rare someone like you is. My clients need exactly that kind of brain. Come by my workspace tomorrow. I'll show you." And somehow, impossibly, I said yes. The next day I found myself in a co-working loft overlooking Nakamiguro's canals. It smelled like roasted coffee and printer toner. Evelyn introduced me to 2 ceramic artists on a video call. One in Kyoto, one in Busan. She translated, orchestrated, nudged. Their work was stunning. But their logistics? A mess. Wrong freight categories. Overpriced carriers. No batching strategy. Transit risk not mitigated. Packaging designs that worked beautifully but collapsed under humidity. I pointed out a few optimizations. Small ones. Tiny ones. Both artists stared at me like I'd just solved a mystery they didn't know they'd been living in. Evelyn's eyes gleamed. "Oh yeah," she said. "You're hired." I don't even know what this job is." "It's whatever we need it to be." She clapped her hands once. "Do you want to help creative people get their work into the world?" I didn't answer right away. I said I thought about Austin. The spreadsheets. The Slack messages. The feeling of being useful but never valued. And then I thought about this. A room full of light and possibility. A woman who saw potential in me instantly. Artists whose life's work could travel farther because of something I understood. So I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I want that." That night, walking back to my capsule hotel under the soft glow of lanterns lining a narrow alleyway, I felt something shift inside me again. Not a snap this time. Not a break. A beginning. A quiet, steady expansion of the space I allowed myself to take up. I was learning again. I was building again. I was meeting people who didn't know the version of me who stayed small. And with each new day I felt a little less like the girl who had been left off a guest list. And a little more like the woman who was finally writing her own. Evelyn wasted no time putting me to work. By the end of my first week with her, I'd met 6 artisans across 3 countries. Some on video calls, some in person, and all of them had the same problem. Their craft was brilliant. Their processes were not. One afternoon, sitting in a sunlit co-working space overlooking the Nakameguro Canal, I stared at a cluster of spreadsheets, invoices, shipping notices, and scanned customs forms from a potter in Kyoto named Takashi. He made bowls so stunning they looked like ancient artifacts unearthed from a temple. But he packaged them in flimsy cardboard boxes that crumpled in humidity, causing a 40% breakage rate during transit. 40%. How is he not bankrupt? I asked Evelyn. Stubbornness, she answered. And pride. And a nephew who keeps telling him, this time will be better. I spread the documents across the table and got to work. Hours passed without me noticing. The air smelled faintly of coffee beans and river breeze. People moved around me, typing, laughing quietly, clacking keyboards like soft rain, but I barely registered any of it. I was in it, fully immersed the way I hadn't felt in months. Maybe years. By the time Evelyn returned from a meeting, I had an optimized packing system drawn up, 3 alternate carriers selected, an updated cost projection and a redesigned shipping workflow that would cut breakage down to under 5% and save Takashi 610,000 yen a year. She looked at me like I'd just conjured gold out of air. You did this in an afternoon? I blinked at her. Should it have taken longer? Her laugh echoed across the loft. You have absolutely no idea how good you are at this, do you? I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Not embarrassment, something else. Something like recognition. Not from others. From myself. 2 days later, Evelyn and I took the Shinkansen to Kyoto to meet Takashi in person. His workshop sat at the edge of the city, beside a river lined with drooping willow trees. The space smelled of clay and earth and smoke. He greeted us formally, bowing deeply, hands dusted with gray. When I showed him the new packing prototype, corrugated partitions, reinforced corners, humidity-resistant materials, he touched the structure gently like it was a fragile miracle. Then he bowed again. Arigato gozaimasu, he said quietly. Thank you for protecting my work. I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever thanked me like that at my old job. In Austin, the closest I'd come was a Slack emoji reaction, from a manager who barely remembered my last name. Here, a master craftsman was thanking me for preserving the art he'd poured his soul into. Something swelled inside my chest. Warm, heavy, unexpected. Pride. Respect. Worth. Real worth. We stayed for hours. He showed us how he carved the delicate patterns into his bowls. How he mixed glazes. How he fired each piece in a traditional kiln that crackled and glowed like the center of the earth. When we left, he insisted on gifting me a small cup, handmade, pale blue with tiny flecks that shimmered under sunlight. For tea, he said. For beginnings. I carried it back to Tokyo as if it were made of light. And that wasn't the only win. Within a month I had reduced freight costs for a textile collective in Busan by 27%. Helped a woodworker in Nagano navigate international customs for the first time. Built a digital inventory system for a lacquer artist who had been tracking sales on paper scraps. Negotiated a bulk shipping agreement that saved Evelyn's consultancy almost $14,000 a year. These weren't massive amounts of money by corporate standards. But they were life-changing amounts for the people we worked with. And every time one of them looked at me with gratitude or relief or trust, I felt something inside me reassemble itself, piece by piece, into someone stronger. Someone who didn't need permission to be valuable. Someone who didn't need family validation to feel seen. But the real turning point, the moment things shifted from, I'm helping the business, to I could build something of my own, happened in a tiny coffee shop in Ueno. It was late afternoon, warm, the air filled with the smell of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement. Evelyn was reviewing contracts, her glasses slipping down her nose, while I reran data models for a group of Sapporo artisans. A man approached our table, Korean, early 40s, impeccably dressed. His name was Min-jae Park, an owner of a boutique import shop in San Francisco. He'd heard about our work through one of Evelyn's clients and wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. We talked for an hour. Then Then he asked me directly, "Have you ever considered consulting independently?" I froze. Evelyn looked at me over her glasses, eyebrows rising. I haven't," I said truthfully. "You should," Minjae replied. "You see patterns other people miss. And you explain them in ways that make sense. That's rare." He handed me his card. Gold edges. Embossed lettering. "Serious money. Call me when you're ready," he said. When he left, Evelyn let out a long whistle. "Well damn," she said. "You're leveling up faster than I expected." I stared at the business card. Consulting independently. I'd never imagined that in Austin. I'd never believed I was capable of it. But here, surrounded by people who valued my mind instead of the ease of dismissing me, the idea didn't seem absurd. It seemed possible. Evelyn nudged my arm. "You know," she said lightly, "when I met you I thought you were running from something." I admitted. "And now?" she asked. I looked down at my notes, at a page filled with arrows and diagrams and solutions that didn't exist a week earlier. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm running toward something." Evelyn smiled. "That," she said, "is the best place to start." That night, in the dim glow of my capsule pod, I turned on my phone for the first time in days. It lit up instantly, calls, texts, emails. Dozens. From my family. My mother. My father. Nolan. Even Sloan. All asking where I was. If I was okay. Something had happened. But mixed between all the frantic messages was an older text, time-stamped from the morning after my original group chat message. From my father. Just 3 words. "Please call home." In the past, that would have been enough to send guilt spiking through me. But now I felt something entirely different. Distance. Clarity. Power. I didn't open the message. I didn't respond. Instead, I powered off my phone again and placed it face down beside me. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't obligated to explain myself to anyone. Not my family. Not my past. Not the version of me they had depended on. I was building a new life. One ink stroke, one conversation, one solved problem at a time. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. It happened on a Wednesday. Funny how life-changing moments never pick glamorous days. Not weekends. Not holidays. Not dramatic midnights under lightning. Wednesday. The sky over Tokyo was overcast, the kind of pale gray that makes the whole city feel like soft watercolor. I'd spent the morning in a co-working loft in Daikanyama, cross-referencing inventory logs for the Busan Textile Collective. Evelyn was beside me, knee-deep in a pricing negotiation with a wholesaler in Vancouver. It was an ordinary day. Right up until it wasn't. We'd barely finished lunch, rice bowls from a shop downstairs, when my inbox pinged with a subject line that made me assume it was spam at first. Inquiry. International Logistics Consultant. Referral. M. Park. My stomach tightened. I clicked. And there was a message from someone named Daniel Kessler, Senior Operations Director for Helio Global Supply, a mid-size American distributor I'd never heard of, but who clearly had heard of me. Or at least, heard enough. Marin. My colleague, Minjae Park, spoke highly of your recent work optimizing artisan supply chains across Japan and Korea. We are struggling with our Southeast Asian vendors. Frequent delays, inconsistent quality control, and soaring freight costs. Minjae believes you may offer a unique perspective. We'd like to schedule a call to discuss a consulting contract. This would be remote and project-based with potential for extended engagement. Please let me know your availability. Regards, Daniel Kessler, Senior Director, Helio Global Supply. I reread the email 3 times. Then a 4th. Then a 5th. I felt my pulse in my throat, in my fingertips, in the quiet spaces behind my ribs. Evelyn must have sensed I'd gone silent because she leaned over my shoulder. "What's that face? Is it good news or bad news? You look like someone who just saw their name on a watch list." I turned my laptop slightly so she could read. Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, this is big," she said. "This is very big. Helio's legit. They're not artisanal Etsy sellers. They're a proper corporation." I couldn't speak for a moment. She tapped the screen with a fingernail painted dark green. "You need to take this call." My throat tightened. "Evelyn, I don't know if I'm ready for something like this." She stared at me, expression flattening into that frank, razor-sharp look she reserved for moments when she thought I was being ridiculous. "You are more than ready," she said. "You've been outperforming every freelancer I've ever hired. You think too small because you've been treated small. That's not the same thing as being unqualified." Her words hit me with the same quiet force that Hiyori's had weeks before. "You're afraid to take up space." Evelyn continued, gentler this time. "Listen. I can guide you through pricing, scope, deliverables. But the talent, the brain, the instincts." She shook her head. "That's yours. And Helio saw it. That's not an accident." I stared at the email again, the cursor blinking like a countdown. This wasn't just a chance. It was a pivot point. A moment where the life I was building could suddenly expand beyond Asia, beyond side projects, beyond the quiet anonymity I'd been floating in. This was professional legitimacy, corporate recognition. A door into a world I'd never been allowed to enter before. A door I hadn't even known existed. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled, then clicked reply. "Hi Daniel. Thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss your supply chain challenges and potential collaboration. I'm currently based in Tokyo and available for a video call this Friday at 9 a.m. Japan Standard Time, or anytime Monday afternoon, JST. Looking forward to hearing from you. Maren Ellis." I hovered over the send button, and then I pressed it. The moment the email whooshed away, my hands trembled, not with fear but with something brighter and sharper. Anticipation. That Friday morning I found myself in the small meeting room of our co-working space, hair pinned back, blouse pressed, laptop propped at just the right angle so the light from the window didn't wash out my face. Evelyn had insisted on coaching me for 2 hours the night before, walking me through phrasing, rates, red flags, negotiation cues. "You're not asking for their approval," she'd said firmly. "You're offering value. That's not the same thing." Those words stayed with me. At exactly 9 a.m., the Zoom waiting room disappeared, replaced by the face of a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and a sharp, analytical expression. "Maren," he said. "Thank you for making the time." We exchanged greetings and then he launched straight into the problem. Their shipments from Vietnam and Malaysia were delayed by an average of 22 days. Costs were climbing. Quality checks were unreliable. Their current consultants had overpromised and underdelivered. "Minjae says you've solved similar issues?" he asked. I nodded and began walking him through the frameworks I'd developed in the past month. Risk mapping, supplier value alignment, freight aggregation, regional culture integration in vendor negotiations. Daniel listened. Really listened. He asked pointed questions, pushed back in spots, pressed for details where he needed them. And with every answer I gave, with every piece of insight I pulled from my mind, something inside me expanded. I wasn't performing. I wasn't faking. I wasn't pretending to be competent. I was competent. Fiercely so. At one point, Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "This is impressive," he said. My chest tightened. "Thank you." "No, I mean it," he continued. "We've had consultants with 20 years of experience who didn't articulate solutions this clearly." Heat rushed to my cheeks. He wasn't flattering me. He wasn't trying to sell me anything. He was simply stating a fact. A fact no one in my old life had ever noticed or cared to notice. Daniel moved on to contracts. "We'd like to start with a 3-month engagement," he said, naming a figure that made my breath catch. "And if that goes well, we could expand to a more permanent arrangement." A more permanent arrangement. A path. A future. Something I could build. I didn't hesitate. "That works for me," I said. We wrapped the call with a promise to exchange documents by the end of the week. When the Zoom window closed, I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark screen. A different woman than the one who'd boarded a flight out of Austin. A different woman than the one who'd cried quietly in a Walmart parking lot. A different woman than the forgotten sister on the outskirts of her family's story. This woman was someone else entirely. Someone emerging. Evelyn burst into the room a second later. "Well," she demanded. "How did it go?" I turned to her, stunned and glowing. I whispered, "I just landed a global client." She let out a scream that startled the man working outside at the printer. Then she grabbed my shoulders and shook me playfully. "Maren," she said, "welcome to the real game." That night, I walked through Shibuya with a drink in hand, neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement. People swirled around me, laughing, talking, living. I felt a strange, powerful warmth spread through me. Not fleeting excitement, not adrenaline, but belonging. Not because of someone else. Not because of my family. Not because of approval that was handed down like a reluctant reward. But because I had earned it. With my mind. With my work. With my courage to leave. And as I crossed the famous Shibuya Scramble, surrounded by thousands of strangers moving in every direction, one quiet truth settled in my chest. I had disappeared from the life that made me small. And now the world was finally big enough for me. The first time I saw the email from Helios HR team titled, U.S. Site Visit and Contract Launch Proposal, I felt something inside me slow, then tighten, then slowly heat with a mix of anticipation and dread. I'd been in Japan for almost 4 months by then. 4 months of growth. 4 months of momentum. 4 months of becoming someone who made decisions, not someone life simply carried along. But that email had a gravitational pull. It pulled me homeward. Back to America. Back to the country where I had been small. Back to a place filled with versions of me I no longer recognized. Back to the place I'd run from. I read the email 3 times. Helio wanted me on site in their Seattle hub for 2 weeks to meet the executive team, tour partner facilities, and finalize the strategic rollout of the Southeast Asia Restructuring Initiative. I could stay overseas after that. I could continue consulting remotely. But the visit was non-negotiable. Evelyn found me still staring at my screen, frozen. Bad news, she asked. I shook my head. They want me in the U.S. She lifted a brow. The land of fast food and familial trauma. I huffed a laugh, but it came out thin. She slid into the chair beside me. Marin, you don't have to see your family. I know. But you want to, she said gently. I hesitated, then nodded. I did. As much as I dreaded it, I did. Not because they deserved it. Not because I owed them. But because I needed it. I needed to know I could walk back into that world without shrinking. I needed to see if the new version of me, this version, could survive the gravitational pull of the past. I booked the ticket for 2 weeks later. Tokyo, Vancouver, Seattle. The night before my flight, I visited Hayori's studio one last time. The familiar scent of ink and cedar filled the air. She stood at her table, shaping a sheet of washi paper with slow, expert hands. You're leaving, she said without turning. Her intuition never failed to unnerve me. I have to go back for work. She nodded as if she'd already known. You are not afraid of the job, she said softly. You are afraid of the place. I swallowed. Something like that. She turned to face me, eyes warm but piercing. Transformation is fragile. Young. Still soft at the edges. When you return to the place where you were small, you must protect your new shape. I didn't know why, but her words made my throat tighten. She placed a small brush into my hand. For courage, she said. Come back when your heart needs quiet again. I hugged her. She didn't flinch. She hugged me back with surprising strength. The flight to North America felt longer than the one that had taken me away from it. Not physically, emotionally. Every hour brought me closer to a life that once fit me like a too small sweater, itchy and tight and suffocating. A life where I had been invisible. What if stepping back into that world shrank me again? I tried to distract myself. Watched movies. Listened to music. Jotted down notes for Helio's rollout plan. But nothing soothed the unease. It wasn't until the plane began descending into Vancouver that something shifted. The woman sitting next to me, a grandmother flying home from a visit to her grandkids in Osaka, leaned over and whispered, "First time back home in a while?" I startled. "How did you know?" She smiled knowingly. "Your face looks like someone returning to a place she outgrew." My breath caught. She patted my hand. "You'll be all right, dear. People change. Stronger roots don't break." And just like that, the tension eased. When I landed in Seattle, the Pacific Northwest air greeted me like a memory, cool, damp, tinged with pine. The airport felt both foreign and familiar, as if I were walking through an old dream I'd once had. I collected my luggage, booked a lift, and watched the city roll by through the window. Gray skies, evergreen silhouettes, cranes jutting over the port. I checked into a boutique hotel downtown, the kind of place business travelers used when they wanted to feel sleek and important. The room overlooked Elliott Bay, boats gliding across the steel blue water. For a moment I stood there in silence. I was back. In America. In the country I'd left behind. And I didn't feel small. Not even a little. The next morning I walked into Helio's Seattle office wearing black slacks, a crisp blouse, and a confidence that felt quiet but unmistakably solid. Daniel met me in the lobby. In person he looked exactly as he had on Zoom. Sharp, self-assured, scanning everything with the quick appraisal of someone who managed problems for a living. "Marin," he said, extending a hand. "Good to finally meet you." We shook. Firm handshake. Steady eye contact. Grounded stance. Not the girl who used to make herself smaller. Not the girl who waited for permission to exist. Daniel led me through the office. Glass walls, bustling teams, white boards crowded with timelines and acronyms, and introduced me to the people I'd be working with. Some were friendly. Some were curious. Some were skeptical. But every single one of them listened. Really listened. I belonged in those rooms. Not as an afterthought. Not as a support character. But as the expert they had flown across the world to meet. By the time we wrapped the last meeting of the day, their chief logistics officer had pulled me aside to say, "This initiative could save us millions. You've clearly become indispensable very quickly." Indispensable. The word buzzed through me like warm electricity. No one had ever used that word for me before. Not at my old job. Not in my family. Not in the world I'd grown up in. Later that night, alone in my hotel room with the Seattle skyline blinking outside the window, I opened my phone for the first time since landing. A flood of notifications. Texts from my family. Voicemails. Emails. Missed calls. But one message was new. Arrived an hour ago. From my mother. "We heard from cousin Margaret that you're in the US. Can we see you? We miss you, sweetheart. Please let us know if you're safe. We love you." I stared at the words. Soft. Hopeful. Too little too late. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, hands behind my head, staring at the ceiling. Because right now this moment wasn't about them. It was about me. About the woman who had left America small. And returned powerful. About the life that had begun the moment I chose to walk away. And about the door that was opening now, one I'd never have been allowed through in my old world. A door I was walking through with steady, deliberate steps. I didn't know it yet. But this return to America would change everything. Not because of my family. But because of who I had become without them. And who I was about to become next. I wasn't planning to see them. That was the truth. Not because I wanted to punish them. I'd moved past that part, the ache and the sharpness and the desperate question of why wasn't I enough? No, now it was something else. I needed to know I could stand in front of the people who once defined me. And not dissolve back into who I used to be. So when my mother texted again the next morning, "We're in Seattle. We drove up this morning. Please, can we meet you?" I stared at the screen for a long time. 3 hours to be exact. I went through half of my meetings with Helio, responded to logistics queries, mapped out the vendor pipeline, presented a revised freight model, all while the message sat at the back of my mind like a weight I kept shifting from one hand to the other. At lunch, sitting alone with a salad I wasn't eating, I finally typed. "Tonight, 7 p.m. Café Nocturne on Pine Street. Neutral ground. Public space. No emotional ambushes." When my mother responded with a flurry of relieved emojis and exclamation points, I turned my phone back off. I wasn't ready to think about it yet. At 6:58 p.m. I stood outside Café Nocturne, heart beating slowly but solidly. The air smelled like wet pavement and roasted coffee. The sky was the color of steel wool. Inside, soft jazz drifted through the warm lights and wooden shelves lined with plants. They were already there. My mother. My father. Nolan. Sitting at a small table in the back like a portrait of the family I used to belong to. I felt something inside me tilt, like an old, familiar gravity trying to pull me back into orbit. But gravity only works on things that aren't moving. And I was moving. I walked toward them. My mother's eyes filled instantly. She stood so quickly her chair screeched across the floor. "Oh, Marin," she breathed, reaching for me. I didn't step back, but I didn't step forward either. Her arms wrapped around me, tentative and trembling as if she wasn't sure I'd let her. I didn't hug back. Not yet. I wasn't ready. My father stood next. Quiet, steady, eyes rimmed in exhaustion. I didn't remember being there before. "You look Different, he said. I am, I replied. Nolan rose last. He looked older somehow. Not physically, emotionally. His shoulders sagged in a way I'd never seen. Hey, he said softly. Hey. He stepped forward like he wanted to hug me but stopped halfway, unsure. I sat down. They followed. Silence settled like dust. My mother broke first. We were so scared, she said. You just vanished. No explanation. No goodbye. My voice was calm. Level. Controlled. I sent a message saying I needed time. That's not the same thing, she said, her voice rising just slightly. It's exactly the same thing, I replied. My father placed a hand over hers, a silent plea for her to stay steady. We deserve that, he said quietly. We failed you. The words hung in the air. Slowly I nodded. Yes, I said. You did. My mother inhaled sharply. Her eyes glistened. We didn't know, she whispered. We didn't know how much we hurt you. You didn't ask, I said. You didn't notice. Nolan's jaw tightened. That's not fair, Marin, he said. We've always cared about you. Did you? I asked, voice soft but sharp enough to cut. Because you didn't care enough to realize I wasn't included in your wedding. His face crumpled. It wasn't on purpose, he said. I swear. I thought Mom and Dad were handling it. My mother hid her face in her hands. It was a horrible mistake, she said. We were juggling so much. It wasn't a mistake, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. But it was unflinchingly firm. It was a pattern. They froze. Every major moment in this family revolved around Nolan. Every decision. Every celebration. Every priority. And I didn't complain. I didn't ask for more. I played the role you needed me to play. My throat tightened, not with tears but with clarity. But when you forgot me like that, that was the moment I realized the role wasn't accidental. It was permanent. My father winced. That's not true, he said. We love you. We always have. I never said you didn't. I leaned in slightly. But love without awareness isn't love. It's comfort. Silence rippled across the table. Nolan swallowed hard. You could have talked to us, he said quietly. Before leaving the country. Before disappearing. I tried, I said. My entire life. You just weren't listening. His lips parted but no words came. It was my mother who broke first, her voice trembling. What can we do to fix this? I shook my head slowly. I didn't ask for you to fix anything. They stared at me confused. I continued. I didn't disappear to punish you. I disappeared to find myself. And I did. A breath. Pause. A truth I had never spoken before. I like who I am now. And I'm not willing to lose her to make you comfortable again. My father nodded slowly, almost proudly, almost painfully. It seems, he said, voice low, you outgrew the way we treated you. I did, I said. And I'm not going backward. My mother wiped a tear. Does that mean we lost you? No, I said. It means you have to get to know me again. Their relief was visible and fragile. Nolan leaned forward. Can we, he asked. Can we try? I looked at him, my older brother, the golden one, the sun around which our family had orbited. For the first time I didn't see him as the center. Just as a person. Trying, I said softly, is the only thing I'm asking for. We talked for 2 hours. Not the emotional dumping I'd expected. Not a dramatic reconciliation. Just honest conversation. Messy. Awkward. Human. When we finally stood to leave, my mother touched my arm. Marin, she said softly. Yes. You seem happy, she whispered. A tear slipped down her cheek. We didn't know how to help you find that. But I'm glad you found it anyway. For the first time that night I reached out and hugged her. Not for her. For me. As I could. As I wanted to. Because it didn't cost me anything anymore. When we parted, Nolan lingered behind. I'm sorry, he said quietly. About everything. I should have been a better brother. You still can be, I said. His eyes softened. I will be. We walked out into the cool Seattle night. They turned left toward the parking lot. I turned right toward my hotel. We didn't walk together. And that felt right. Not because there was distance. But because for the first time in my life, I chose my own direction. And it led somewhere I had fought hard to reach. If there's one thing I've learned since leaving home, it's this. The past has a way of circling back. Not because it wants to reclaim you, but because it wants to see if you're still vulnerable. Sometimes it comes in the form of family. Sometimes old fears. Sometimes regrets. And sometimes it comes wearing a smug corporate smile and a poorly knotted tie. His name was Bradford Kane. Brad. But at my old company he insisted everyone call him Bradford, because he thought it sounded more executive. He was the kind of guy who bragged about getting 6 hours of sleep like it was a moral accomplishment, and he treated every meeting like a battlefield where he was the sole general. Back when I worked at Dynasis Logistics in Austin, he'd been one rung above me on the ladder. Not because he was smarter. Not because he worked harder. But because he was loud. Loud men get promoted. Quiet women get overlooked. You learn that early in corporate life. At Dynasis, I'd spent years doing the invisible labor. Running the numbers, fixing the mistakes, smoothing the workflow, while Brad presented my findings with a charismatic grin and a confidence that fooled the people in charge. I left before they ever realized how much of his success was built on my work. And in the months since I'd vanished, apparently Brad hadn't stopped thinking about me. Not in a nostalgic way. Not in a remorseful way. But in a competitive, territorial, panicked way. Because now I was at Helio. Now I was consulting on international expansion. Now I was succeeding loudly enough that my name had started circulating in industry channels. And Brad, poor Brad, had built his entire sense of competence on the assumption that I would never do that. So when I received the LinkedIn message from him, it was almost comical. Bradford Kane. Heard you're back in the States. Let's catch up. I have some big ideas I think we should discuss. The quotation marks around big ideas made me snort into my tea. Evelyn saw the message from across the table in the Seattle co-working space we'd rented for my stay. Oh no, she said. Is that one of your past ghosts? The dumbest one, I said. Delete it. I want to hear what he wants. Evelyn arched a brow. Oh, absolutely not. Whatever he wants, he doesn't deserve it. Make him wait 6 to 8 business years. But I shook my head. Because something in me knew this moment mattered. Not because of Brad. But because of me. The old me would have avoided him. The new me wasn't afraid. So I replied. Maren, Tuesday. 9 a.m. Cafe Astor on 5th. He responded in seconds. Bradford. Perfect. Looking forward to collaborating, winking face. Collaborating. Sure, Brad. Tuesday at 9 a.m. I walked into Cafe Astor wearing a navy blazer, dark jeans, and the quiet confidence that comes from a life rebuilt on your own terms. Brad was already there, sitting with one arm thrown over the chair, legs spread like he owned the entire cafe. He stood when he saw me, plastering on a 100-watt smile. Maren. Well, look, different. Japan must have agreed with you. I suppose it did. We sat. I didn't order anything. I wanted to get this over with. Brad leaned forward with the false intimacy of someone who thinks they still have leverage over you. So, he said, I've been hearing your name around the industry. Consultant. International strategy. Supply chain optimization. Very impressive. For someone who used to be such a behind-the-scenes person. There was the insult wrapped in flattery. The reminder of who I used to be. You're here for a reason, I said calmly. What is it? He blinked. He'd expected small talk. Maybe flustered politeness. He didn't know this version of me. Well, he said, shifting, I'm leading an expansion initiative at Dynasis. We've been watching Helio's movement closely. You're shaking up markets. Fast. Which is disruptive. Thank you, I said. We're aiming for that. He didn't catch the sarcasm. He never had. He steepled his hands like a professor. What I'm proposing is simple. You feed me information. Insights. Strategy samples. In exchange, I make sure no one at Dynasis positions you as a threat. He said it like he was offering a gift. I stared at him. Not with anger. Not with hurt. But with the calm, cool understanding that comes from finally seeing something clearly. Brad wasn't my rival. Brad was terrified. Terrified that the quiet woman he'd spent years overshadowing had grown into someone he couldn't ignore. I leaned back in my chair. What makes you think I'd ever help you? I asked. His smile twitched. You know how this industry works. Connections. Favors. Alliances. I don't need your protection, I said. From what, exactly? He swallowed. His hands tightened around his coffee cup. You don't understand the stakes, Marin. Helio is aggressively undercutting us. We've lost market share. If you keep going at this rate, if you continue whatever you're doing in Vietnam and Malaysia. That's confidential, I interrupted. He flinched. Then, Marin, you've made enemies. People are talking. Maybe I can help buffer some of that. Why would you help me? I asked. Because silence reveals more than talking ever could. He hesitated. Looked down. Then admitted it. Because you're doing things I can't replicate. The truth. His voice tightened. You were always good at the details. The rest of us. He gestured vaguely as if including other men like him. We guided the bigger picture. You took credit for my work, I corrected. He exhaled sharply. Fine. Maybe I did. That's not the point. The point is we don't have your skill. Not with suppliers. Not with international negotiation. Whatever you figured out in Asia, we missed it. He looked up at me, eyes sharper now. Help me. We can both win. I let 3 seconds of silence settle between us. Then I said very calmly, no. He blinked. No. He laughed like he thought he'd misheard. Marin, be reasonable. I am. Look, he said, tone shifting, if you think you can take on Dionysus alone, you're. I already am, I said. His mouth snapped shut. I continued. You're not losing market share because of some mysterious strategy. You're losing because you treat suppliers like machines instead of people. You bulldoze. You assume authority instead of earning trust. You walk into rooms and take credit for work you didn't do. That's why you're failing. His face reddened. You think you're better than me? He snapped. I smiled. Small, quiet, lethal. I don't think I'm better than you, Brad. I paused. I know I am. He stood abruptly, chair scraping. This isn't over, he said, voice shaking. It is, I said. For you. He left. Not with power. Not with dignity. But with the realization that whatever game he thought we were playing, I was playing a different one. And I was winning. After he left, I stayed in the cafe for a few minutes, letting the adrenaline settle. Outside, cars moved slowly down the rain-slicked street. The city hummed around me. And somewhere deep inside something clicked into place. I wasn't the woman he used to overshadow. I wasn't the girl who let others take credit. I wasn't the sister who disappeared in photos. I wasn't the daughter who blended into the background. I was a force now. Men like Brad. Men who built entire careers on the assumption that women like me belonged in the wings. Had no idea what to do with a woman who finally stepped onto the stage. I stood, closed my coat, and walked out into the Seattle air with a certainty I'd never carried before. The past had circled back. And this time, I wasn't the one who flinched. Success doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives quietly. A shift in posture here. A new kind of email there. A name spoken in rooms where it was never mentioned before. And then one day you look around and realize. You've transformed while no one was watching. That's what happened during my second week at Helio. I didn't suddenly become brilliant. I didn't discover some secret formula. What changed was that people finally heard me. Because I wasn't whispering anymore. My schedule was packed. Meetings with regional directors, strategy reviews, data audits, negotiations with our Vietnamese partners, onboarding the new Malaysian compliance officer. But amid all the noise, one moment stood out. A moment that told me, unmistakably, that my trajectory was no longer an accident. It happened in a glass-walled boardroom with a long walnut table and panoramic views of Elliott Bay. The senior leadership team was reviewing Helio's Q3 projections. There were 11 people in the room. 10 men, 1 woman. All older than me. All more experienced. All well aware of their power. Daniel had asked me to present the new supplier optimization strategy. I'd spent the previous night fine-tuning it in my hotel room, running scenarios again and again, trying to anticipate every question. I was ready. Or at least I thought I was. But nothing prepares you for the moment when a CEO turns to you, the youngest person in a room full of veterans, and says, Marin, walk us through your recommendation. My heartbeat thudded once hard. Then steadied. I stood, clicked to the first slide and spoke. Not quickly, not nervously. But with clarity. With grounded confidence. With the voice of someone who knew she belonged in the room. I outlined the inefficiencies in the Southeast Asia pipeline. Fragmented vendor communication. Inconsistent quality checks. Duplicated freight lanes. Misaligned incentives. Outdated batching systems. Then I presented the new model. Centralized multi-tier communication. Region-specific negotiation strategy. Standardized QC checkpoints. Consolidated freight contracts. Dynamic routing algorithms for variable demand. Supplier education programs, culturally tailored. The CFO interrupted halfway through. These savings projections, are they realistic? I clicked to the comparison chart. Yes, I said. And conservative. The real gains will appear in 6 months when the supplier trust curve stabilizes. He stared at me. Slowly nodded. The CEO jumped in next. And what about risk exposure? We've had compliance issues before. I switched slides. Risk mitigation matrix. Stakeholder oversight plan. Internal audit schedule. He nodded too. Then came the final question. The one that would determine whether they were merely impressed. Or invested. Gregory, the CEO, leaned forward. If we give you full authority on this rollout, can you deliver within 4 months? 4 months. An aggressive timeline. Impossible if the old me answered. But the woman who had managed ceramic shipments across borders, negotiated with artisans in Busan, and rebuilt an entire distribution model from a capsule hotel in Tokyo? She didn't flinch. Yes, I said simply. I can. A silence settled. Not skepticism. Consideration. Then approval. Gregory nodded once. Then we're doing it. I sat down, pulse steady, mind sharp. And in that instant I felt it. Recognition. Respect. Authority. The trifecta I had never experienced in Austin. In my old life, if I spoke in a meeting, people looked mildly surprised as if the furniture had begun talking. Here they listened. Here I mattered. After the meeting, Daniel caught up to me in the hallway. You handled that beautifully, he said. Some of those guys have been running supply chains since before you were born. Should I take that as a compliment or an insult? Both, he chuckled. But mostly a compliment. The board is paying attention. I blinked. The board. Yes. Gregory showed them your Vietnam numbers last week. They're asking who you are and where we found you. A strange, warm weight settled in my chest. Not pride. Validation. A quiet, steady acknowledgement of reality. I wasn't lucky. I wasn't stumbling into opportunities. I had earned everything. And now the world was adjusting to that fact. The next few days were a blur of progress. My new supplier alignment strategy cut lead times by 18% in the first week. The Vietnamese partners sent a message praising the clarity and professionalism of the new workflow. The Malaysian compliance officer told Daniel. She's the first American consultant who actually understands how things work here. That feedback traveled quickly. Too quickly. Competitors started asking questions. Dynasis in particular. Helio's market share numbers ticked upward. Quietly but steadily. And one night as I walked back to my hotel through the drizzle, my phone buzzed with an email from Daniel. Board wants you to present next Thursday. Prepare your full expansion blueprint. This is big. I stopped walking. Stood under the awning of a bookstore. Let the rain hit the sidewalk in soft bursts. Let the words sink into me. The board. Me. Presenting. At 29. After being overlooked for nearly my entire life. The version of me who cried in her car in a Walmart parking lot felt like a ghost. Still there, still mourned, but no longer steering. The present me? She stood tall. 2 days later, I moved into a longer-term Seattle apartment, paid for by Helio, because the project was officially extending. They wanted me in the States for at least 3 months, then alternating between Asia and the US afterward. Curwise. It was everything I'd ever wanted but never allowed myself to imagine. Life-wise. It felt like a beginning far bigger than Seattle, Tokyo, or even my family. Speaking of which, they texted, told, sent long, emotional messages I read slowly, carefully. They were trying. Really trying. But I responded sparingly. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. Healing wasn't a door to fling open. It was a door to crack slowly, cautiously on my terms. And for the first time I had terms. One evening, just before sunset, I found myself standing on the balcony of my new apartment, watching ferries drift across the water, the city lights flickering to life. The cool air brushed my face. The sky glowed with streaks of gold and violet. And a thought rose in my chest, quiet, sure, complete. I have become the person I always hoped someone would see. But no one needed to see her. I saw her. That was enough. And the world finally had started seeing her too. Success doesn't stay quiet for long. Not in business. Not in family. Not in the places where your absence used to be mistaken for your insignificance. And as Helios' numbers rose and Dionysus's fell, as my name began circulating in logistic circles with the kind of respect I once thought was reserved for louder, more self-assured people, as suppliers across Asia started mentioning Marin-san, the way people talk about someone who understands them, the echoes of my rise began reaching all the places that once treated me like a footnote. Some responded with pride. Some with disbelief. Some with fear. But the consequences were the part one couldn't have predicted. It started with an article. A small one buried halfway down a trade newsletter. Helios' expansion was outpacing quarterly projections. New partnerships in Vietnam and Malaysia. Record cuts in freight inefficiency. Quote from CEO Gregory Mills praising their agile new consultant-driving global strategy. My name was in the fourth paragraph. Just a line. A mention. But apparently that was enough. Because that night my old coworker Zara sent me a message on Instagram. Zara, girl, did you know Dionysus is having a meltdown over you? I blinked. Type back. Me. What? Why? Her reply came instantly. Zara. Because they finally figured out the reason their Asia strategy keeps blowing up is basically you. Or rather, the lack of you. And Brad is losing his mind. I snorted so hard I nearly spilled my tea. But Zara wasn't joking. She sent me screenshots. Internal Slack messages leaked discreetly by someone we'd both worked with. There was, in black text on pale gray. We underestimated Marin's role in past projects. She had more supplier influence than we realized. Competitor advantage potentially tied to her methodologies. We need to develop a counter-strategy. My name. Over and over. The same name that had barely been remembered in Austin. The name no one had ever said in meetings unless it was attached to a spreadsheet. The name that had been left off a guest list without anyone noticing. Now it was a threat. A disruption. A problem they had to solve. I sat on my hotel bed, phone glowing in my hands, staring at that surreal truth. Success isn't just personal. It's political. And people who once ignored you don't know what to do when ignoring you becomes impossible. The next day Daniel called. Marin, he said without preamble, something funny happened. Thought you should know. He forwarded me an email. From Dionysus. To Helio. Requesting a collaborative discussion about shared market challenges. Translation. They wanted to know what we knew. And how we knew it. Daniel was amused. I was not. Do I need to be concerned? I asked. Not even slightly, he said. They're scrambling. And you're about to present to our board. Once that happens you'll be untouchable. He paused. Do you want us to refuse the meeting? I exhaled slowly. No. Let them come. Let them realize exactly what they lost. My voice didn't tremble. Daniel chuckled softly. Good. That's what I hoped you'd say. Meanwhile, the ripple effects hit my family next. My mother called 3 times in 1 week. Nolan sent long messages asking how Seattle was. My father emailed me a link to an article about dynamic women in logistics, writing, "Thought this might interest you." It was his way of saying, "I'm trying. I'm learning. You matter." And while part of me softened, another part stayed cautious. Trust is slow. Healing is slower. But things were shifting. Gears that had once rusted into place were finally moving. Because when you stop accepting smallness, everyone around you has to relearn your shape. But the biggest consequence, the one I hadn't anticipated, arrived in the form of a phone call from someone I never expected to hear from again. It was late evening. Seattle rain tapped softly against the balcony windows. I was reviewing supplier contracts when my phone lit up with a number I recognized but hadn't saved. Dionysus Corporate, Austin, Texas. I stared at it. The past calling literally. I answered. Hello. A quiet breath on the line. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. Marin, it's Gwen. Gwen Reed. My old department head. The woman who used to praise Brad for leadership presence, while handing me the grunt work he took credit for. My spine straightened. "Gwen," I said. "What a surprise." "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said, voice painfully polite. "It depends," I replied. Pause. "Then, I've been reading about you." I waited. "You've made quite a name for yourself," she said, her tone slipping between admiration and disbelief. "I always knew you had promise." I didn't respond. Promises unrecognized aren't promises. They're blind spots. Gwen swallowed audibly. "I'm reaching out because, well, we're undergoing restructuring. And we're looking for someone with your expertise to act as a consultant." I thought perhaps. "No," I said. Silence. "No?" she repeated as if she'd never heard the word before. "No," I said again, clearer this time. "I'm not interested. But at least hear the offer." "Gwen," I said, "you didn't see my value when I was under your nose every day. You don't get access to it now that everyone else does." A stunned pause. "I see," she said finally. "Well, if you ever reconsider." "I won't." I hung up. My hands trembled, not with fear. With power. Real power. Quiet, earned, undeniable. The kind of power that comes only after you've been discounted enough times that the world stops expecting your compliance. The next morning, I forwarded the voicemail transcript to Daniel with the caption, "Dionysus wants to hire me." His response, "Of course they do. They should have held on to you when they had you." Then a moment later, "Let's bury them." A slow smile stretched across my face. This wasn't revenge. This was alignment. This was the universe adjusting itself around the new version of me. This was justice that required no anger. Only excellence. In the following days, the consequences kept unfolding. Helios numbers climbed. Supplier trust increased. Our Malaysian partner sent a voice note calling me the first foreigner who listens. And Dionysus? They kept losing ground. Not because I wanted to hurt them. Not because I sought payback. But because systems built on arrogance crumble. When they collide with systems built on understanding. My understanding. My work. My voice. My rise. One night, Daniel said something to me that solidified everything. We were reviewing projections in his office, the city glittering behind him like scattered diamonds. He looked up from his screen and said, "You know, Marin, the strangest irony is this. They forgot you. And that's the only reason you became someone unforgettable." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because deep inside I already knew. Their neglect had been the match. My escape had been the flame. Their underestimation had been the fuel. My transformation was the fire. And the blaze was only beginning. There's a moment, quiet, almost weightless, that comes after a long climb. It isn't triumph. It isn't relief. Something far more rare. Equilibrium. A sense that you are finally living a life where every part of the machinery fits, clicks, and moves in the direction you've chosen. Not the direction you were pushed into. Not the direction you stayed in out of fear. But the one you built. Piece by piece. Choice by choice. Boundary by boundary. That moment arrived for me in Seattle on a clear morning in late May, sunlight flashing off the bay like 1,000 scattered coins. I was standing on the balcony of my apartment, coffee in hand, reviewing a revised compliance schema from our Indonesian supplier. When I finished reading it, I realized something startling. I wasn't stressed. My shoulders weren't tight. My jaw wasn't clenched. My breath wasn't shallow. For the first time in my entire adult life, I felt fully in control. Not pretending. Not compensating. Not overworking to prove I deserved a place. Here. Present. Capable. Enough. It took me a moment to recognize the feeling. Freedom. Real freedom. Not the chaotic, frantic version I'd felt when I first landed in Tokyo with a backpack and a half-panicked determination to disappear. Not the defensive kind that comes from running. Not the desperate kind that comes from rebuilding. This was a different creature entirely. The freedom of choosing. Of owning. Of belonging to myself. And with that realization came another. I was no longer reacting to my past. I was shaping my future. My days settled into a rhythm that still felt surreal. Mornings spent aligning freight routes and negotiating supplier terms. Afternoons reviewing data with the Seattle analytics team. Evenings working on the global expansion blueprint for the board. Every hour went toward something meaningful. Every project had impact. Every conversation respected my expertise. People didn't see me as a helper anymore. They saw me as a strategist, a leader, someone necessary. And that was a kind of healing I never expected to feel. Then came the morning Daniel walked into my office. No knocking, wearing a grin that meant trouble or opportunity. Usually both. He dropped a folder onto my desk. "What's this?" I asked. "A new role," he said. "Created specifically for you." I raised a brow. "Daniel." "Hear me out," he said, sitting across from me. "Helio wants you as Director of Global Strategic Expansion." I blinked. "That's a huge jump." "It's not a jump," he said. "It's a correction. We've been playing catch-up with you ever since Asia. This isn't a promotion, it's alignment." My chest tightened with something between disbelief and pride. "This is real?" I asked quietly. Daniel chuckled. "You've earned every inch of it, Marin. The market acknowledges you. The board acknowledges you. Now it's time we acknowledge you." I exhaled slowly. "Hey," I said. "I'll take it." "That's my girl," he said warmly. And for the first time in years, I didn't worry that he'd resent my ambition, or try to control it, or outshine it. He wanted me to rise. And I did. With the new title came new responsibilities, and choices. I needed to travel more. My schedule would tighten. My influence would expand. I also needed a base of operations. Seattle wasn't temporary anymore. So I did something I never imagined doing. I bought a place. Not huge. Not flashy. But mine. A loft overlooking the water with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough space for a small office. A place with light. A place with air. A place with room to grow into whichever version of myself came next. After the sale closed, the realtor handed me the keys with a bright smile. "First home." "Yes," I said. But the truth was more complicated. It wasn't my first home. It was my first chosen home. Just as life was settling into this new rhythm, something unexpected happened. My family started showing up, in small, steady, imperfect ways that didn't feel performative anymore. My father emailed me once a week. Not long letters, short ones. A picture of a garden project he was working on. An article about trade logistics. A random photo of a crow that reminded him of a trip we took when I was a kid. It was quiet. Respectful. He was trying to connect in my language now. My mother called occasionally, but she stopped begging, stopped pleading, stopped pushing. Instead she said things like, "Tell me about your day. What have you been working on? What's something you're proud of this week?" She listened. Really listened. The way I'd wanted her to all my life. And Nolan. He surprised me the most. One morning I woke up to a voicemail from him. "Marin, I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About how I treated you without even realizing it. I'm trying to unlearn some things. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I won't push. I'll let you lead." I listened to that message twice. Then saved it. Not because it healed everything. But because it meant he finally understood that the relationship would grow, or not grow, on my terms, not his. They were learning. Fully. Imperfectly. But genuinely. And for the first time, reconciliation didn't feel like surrender. It felt like choice. Professionally, everything surged upward. My name appeared in 3 trade publications. A panel invitation arrived for a global logistics summit. A European tech firm emailed me asking if I would keynote their conference. Daniel teased that I'd become the face of supply chain modernization, which made me laugh so hard I almost choked on my coffee. But beneath the humor, we both knew it was true. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not in the industry. Not in my family. Not in my own life. I wasn't a background character. I wasn't a placeholder. I wasn't the girl who was easy to overlook. I was a force. A presence. A leader with vision and momentum. And I had built all of it, not because I was seen, but because I kept going even when I wasn't. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, turning the bay gold and copper, I sat on my new balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. I could hear faint music from the street below. The soft hum of ferries in the distance. Seattle's quiet heartbeat. And I thought, if I had never been forgotten, I never would have learned how unforgettable I could be. If my family had never overlooked me, I never would have discovered the strength of being self-defined. If Dionysus had valued me, I never would have left. Never would have traveled. Never would have changed. Never would have become this version of myself. The one I respect. The one I trust. The one I fought for. This life wasn't handed to me. It wasn't gifted. It wasn't luck. It was chosen. By me. For me. And now, for the first time in my life, it finally felt like mine. 2 years after the day my family forgot to include me in my brother's wedding plans, I stood in the glass atrium of the Singapore Logistics Summit, adjusting the microphone clipped to my blazer. My name, Maren Hayes, was printed on a 6-foot banner behind me. Underneath it, the title, Director of Global Strategic Expansion Helio Logistics. People were taking their seats. Executives, entrepreneurs, ministers, analysts, reporters. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed I belonged in a room like this. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have believed anyone would care about what I had to say. But now they weren't just here to listen. They were here because my work mattered. Because I mattered. A young woman approached me, maybe mid-20s, nervous energy radiating off her. "Miss Hayes," she said shyly. "Yes." I smiled. "I've been following your career. Your Vietnam case study changed how I think about supply chain strategy. Would you mind if I asked you a question later? After your talk?" I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "Of course," I said. "I'd be happy to." She exhaled in relief, bowed slightly, then hurried back to her seat. People used to walk past me like I was furniture. Now they looked at me like I was a North Star. And all because I'd made the terrifying choice to step out of a life that had made me small. My speech began. I talked about the future of ethical global distribution. I talked about trust-based supplier relationships. I talked about modernization, data transparency, regional empowerment. I talked about markets that didn't just need disruption, they needed understanding. Afterward, the room rose in a standing ovation. A standing ovation. For me. I couldn't help the quiet laugh that escaped me. Somewhere in Texas, there was probably a framed wedding photo of my brother's big day. A smiling family. A beautiful ceremony. A perfectly set table. And one chair, supposed to be mine, quietly, completely empty. For a long time that image used to hurt. Now it felt like a turning point. An origin story. The moment my life stopped belonging to people who didn't see me. And started belonging to me. My absence from that wedding wasn't a wound anymore. It was a doorway. A door I hadn't been brave enough to open until life shoved me through it. After the conference I checked my phone. A message from Nolan. Saw the live stream. "You were incredible. I'm proud of you, sis. Really proud." Another from my mother. "Sending you love. We'll save you a seat for Sunday dinner whenever you're home. The good seat. Your seat." I smiled. Not out of longing. Not out of bitterness. Just softness. They had changed. Maybe not perfectly. But earnestly. They'd learned to make space for me. The real me, not the convenient version I used to shrink myself into. But my life didn't orbit them anymore. And that was the difference. I wasn't coming home to be included. I was coming home by choice. Later that night, I walked along the Singapore River, warm air brushing against my skin, city lights reflecting in golden ripples across the water. People bustled around me. Tourists, business travelers, locals heading home after a long day. No one knew me here. But I felt known. By myself. I paused at the railing, watching the lights of a boat drift past, and let a truth settle fully, quietly, deeply into my heart. Being forgotten was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because the pain was valuable. Not because suffering builds character. But because losing the place I never truly belonged forced me to build a place where I did. A place made of my ambition. My choices. My courage. My flaws. My growth. My voice. A life not given to me, but carved out of the world. By me. I straightened, breathing in the warm night air. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, confirming details for a meeting in Seoul next week. Work. Travel. Purpose. Possibility. My life was full. Overflowing. I walked forward, merging into the glowing stream of the city, feeling steady, centered, aligned. Unforgettable. Not because they finally remembered me, but because I finally remembered myself. And that will always be enough.